What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Behind the Facade. I am your host, Gavin J. Gallagher, and on this podcast, I explore the mental and emotional game often playing out subconsciously both in your mind and the mind of everyone else in the real estate or property investment market. The key to success in this game is to master your mindset and behavior, to take control of your thoughts, your emotions, and most importantly, your ego. Welcome to the show. What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode. And this week, what I'm going to be doing is bringing one of my guests in to have a discussion. And in this particular case, what we're going to be talking about is buying property while you're an expat living far away. And a lot of people, certainly people that are inside of my accelerator group, they are people that are living in maybe Dubai or Abu Dhabi, but their interest is buying property back home. And so I'm going to introduce our guest today, who goes by the name John. And John is an expat living in Hong Kong, but he invests exclusively back in the UK market. And what's interesting is just the decision-making process that he has gone through on this journey. And so for a lot of people, I do think that this is going to be a lot of valuable insights, and John has built up a reliable team of people that he can use for his investments back home, and I think it's going to be a powerful episode for a lot of you. So without further ado, my conversation with John from Expat Property. John from the Expat Property Story, how are you keeping? Welcome to the podcast.
I'm very well, thank you. It's an honor to be invited on. I really appreciate it.
Well, you're most welcome, John, and I like when people say it's an honor. It makes me feel very important. Let's jump into. People might be questioning why this is John, the expat property guy, as opposed to giving your surname. You go by just your first name, and there's a bit of a intrigue into why you don't share your surname. But in fact, your kind of nickname is the Banksy of podcasting, because you don't share any information about yourself other than your first name. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it's a self-invented nickname, really, so I don't really have the right to kind of compare myself to Banksy. But yeah, I do call myself the secret podcaster because I'm kind of a typical expat property investor, because I have a full-time job. So property started off for me as a side hustle. And as many side hustlers do, I kind of do steal a little bit of time from the day job. So as our portfolio has sort of got to, well, it's worth probably a little bit more than 5 million now, I think that would lead to some uncomfortable office politics. So I decided right from the beginning to be as invisible as possible. And, you know, it's probably marketing suicide, but hey, that's how it is. So I don't mind. I quite enjoy it actually now.
Well, it adds a level of intrigue to the conversation, and people are going to be going off now, Google searching you like I did, and they'll get nothing. I can assure them that they'll find nothing on you. So, I can understand that, because there are people out there that are in fact, I know from my own clients in my coaching business that there are some people that they're in positions in their corporate job that they just don't want their colleagues to know, because there would be an uncomfortable, it's like, wait, hold on, are you a property investor? I didn't, because maybe their role is in an area that would be maybe considered a sensitive topic, and so it's so they want to keep that kind of thing under wraps, and so I can completely understand it. And especially, you're based in Hong Kong.
I am based in Hong Kong, yes. We've been here for 20 years now. Yeah, nearly 20 years.
Wow.
18 and a half.
I'd love to get your take on Hong Kong, because, as you know, I was recently in Dubai, and that is a city that gives me a lot of energy, and I find the architecture there kind of exciting. But Hong Kong is a place I've never actually visited, but I've always been intrigued because of the architecture. And the IM building, and all of these incredible skyscrapers that are there. So, but before we jump into that, let's wind the clock back. And prior to moving to Hong Kong, you were born and bred in the UK, I assume.
Yeah, well, if we go right back to the beginning, my parents are actually Irish, but they moved to the UK in the 1950s. Shows how old I am. And so I grew up in the UK, and then after university, I was around the extreme periphery of the music industry in little bits and pieces here and there, and was never really motivated by money. And then I met my wife in about 2002, and then we got married in 2005. And we decided we were both into travel, so we decided we'd like to live in Hong Kong. So she got a transfer over here, and so then we started a family in 2008, and then started to think more seriously about what we were going to do when we retired, where the money was going to come from. So about 2016, we started investing in property. And 8 years later, we still haven't managed to completely replace our income, which sort of shows how difficult property really is, as opposed to what everyone else will tell you. So, that's basically who I am.
Well, that's a nice intro, John. And tell us this. The first thing that kind of pops into my mind when I think about the journey that you've been on is you've been in Hong Kong now for 20 years. And I think Hong Kong was handed over by the UK to the Chinese. That was around 99, wasn't it?
97. Yeah, June
97.
June or July 1997. Yeah.
So your entire time there has been during Chinese rule, essentially.
Yes, although I did spend about 4 months here in just the turn of 1996 to 1997. So I wasn't here for handover, but I was here for about 4 months during 1996 and the very early part of 97. So I did see what it was like when the British were here.
Right. Okay. Yeah. I was just curious. Had you seen a transformation over the last years? Because we have noticed in the news over the last couple of years that there have been these protests that have been suppressed and stuff like that. And so, just curious, does this interfere with your life in general, or are these kind of like sort of minor pockets where this thing happens?
Well, I mean, it was when was it? 2019. Well, there was the first time there were protests. I think it was 2014, but the main ones were in 2019, and then COVID happened, and then there was sort of they changed the law. They introduced some new laws to kind of crack down on demonstrations and everything. So it's been it's a completely different place now.
Yeah,
it doesn't impact me at all. It's not my battle. It's not my fight. It's not something that affects me in any way at all. So, yeah.
I suppose if you're a student or something like that, you might have different views to somebody who's kind of like middle-aged, kind of, employed by the system essentially. And, I think students tend to be a little bit more sort of risky in what their political views might be.
Well, of course, the irony is that actually when there were protests, I don't know when it was, 50s, 60s, 70s or whatever, in Hong Kong when the British were in charge, the British were pretty ruthless in putting them down. So, when everyone talks about wanting, British democracy, not
with a truncheon, yeah.
Exactly, yeah.
So, John, tell us, the whole point of this episode is really to get into your experience as a person who is living in Hong Kong, which is, essentially the other side of the world from the UK. And you are able to buy and manage and, raise money and all of that stuff, property. And I presume you're not on a plane on a regular basis to check your properties and stuff. I presume you're completely remote, or am I wrong about that?
Well, I mean, I do go back to the UK, but, we were hit pretty badly in terms of the restrictions during COVID. So we were stuck here for pretty much 4 years without being able to leave because of the nature of my job. So there were like, if you left and came back, then you had to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. So effectively, it wasn't really worth it leaving to come back. So, you'd use up all your holiday, in quarantine afterwards. So and that was probably when we acquired quite a lot of our portfolio. So actually, of all our properties, it was only our original London home that we actually visited prior to purchase. I've still got a few properties that I've never been into.
Really,
2 or 3
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I'd like to get into that. And first of all, why don't you sort of describe, I suppose, your portfolio? How is it composed? Is it all residential? Is it student? I know I read somewhere that you started out with students and stuff.
Yeah, so we had our original London home, which was like a little maisonette, a 2 bed, 2 or 3 bed flat in East London. And yeah, then we let that out when we moved to Hong Kong. And then in about 2016, we bought a property in Hong Kong as a buy to let, off plan, new build,
Right,
which was something I would never do in the UK, but it worked
right,
out pretty well for us. So that made, it was, I think it was worth about, we bought it for about the equivalent of 400,000 sterling in
okay,
2016. And by the time it was built in 2018, it was worth 600,000. So we'd made
wow,
200,000 in 2 years. Unfortunately, we had to wait another year to sell it because of some sort of punitive stamp duty rules that you have to sell it. You have to wait 3 years to sell it. Otherwise, you pay a huge stamp duty payment. So actually, in that time, we had the protest that we were just talking about. So the value went down, and we were in that trying to catch a falling knife situation.
oh sugar,
And yeah, so in the end, we sold it for 500,000. But before that, that had given us the bug for property. So
right,
we
right,
started to look at the UK market and bought a 3 bed terrace in Nottingham, which we developed into a 5 bed HMO. We bought it with cash because we basically
yeah,
cashed in our pension. We'd set up a pension earlier on when we'd moved to Hong Kong, so we exited that pension, put the money into the property in Nottingham. We also refinanced our London home, pulled out all of the equity from there, and then we bought the HMO, the first one in 2018, refinanced it after it was developed, did the same the following year, and then we went on a little buying spree. We cashed in the rest of the pension, borrowed some money from our first private investor, and during COVID lockdown, we bought 3 more HMOs. And so they were
okay,
all student HMOs. And then we got a little bit spooked by COVID and lots of students going home. So we thought we better diversify a little bit. And then we got
yeah,
stuck, basically. So we were looking to buy serviced accommodation, properties that we could maybe repurpose back as single lets should we need to. And we found someone to work with. And then we got a red flag just as we were about to buy a property through them. So that put us on the back foot a little bit. Then we went looking for someone else. And by that stage, it was 2022, and it became a seller's market. And I would say, looking back, we should have bought at some stage there, but got a bit spooked.
well, the
Didn't
thing
take
is,
what we should have done, and yeah, it took us a
yeah,
while to get going after that.
I guess it's easy to be critical looking back, but when you're in the moment and you're dealing with red flags and, like, the market is starting to fall, it's very hard to make a decision. I think a lot of people are very critical of themselves when it comes to the mistakes that retrospectively they made. But in the moment when you're making the decision, it's the right decision. It might turn out to be the wrong decision later, but only time will tell. I was saying this to somebody yesterday when I was visiting some properties that I bought in 2003, and I bought these properties in 2003. I sold them in 2004, and in the space of just a year, I actually 3x'd my money. And I can remember saying to this chap that I was talking to yesterday, we were talking about it, and I was saying that, you know, the guy that bought those properties from me, he paid like absolute top dollar for those properties, and at the time, and I had bought something for 600, I sold them for 3 million, so I made this like enormous increase. But the reality is that that person, at the time, it looked like I was the winner and he was the loser because he was paying top market. But fast forward like 10 years, and that guy might be sitting on properties worth 5 million. And so I'd be feeling like I sold them too early. So you never know. Like, at the moment that you're selling something, all you know is what I paid for it versus what it's currently worth. You don't know what the future holds. It could go up or it could go down. And so I think people should not be so critical of their decision because it's made in a moment, and you have only so much information to hand.
Yeah. Well, I've talked a little bit on my podcast about a fantastic author called Annie Duke, who's basically an ex-poker champion. And
Okay.
she talks a lot about this concept of when people look back on the best and worst decisions that they made in the last year, usually they make them, they evaluate these decisions based on the result rather than whether it was a good decision. Whereas
Yes,
actually all you can
exactly.
do is make the best decision according to the circumstances that you're in at that given time. So it might go well, it might not go well, but the decision is still possibly a good decision, whatever happens with the result.
You're absolutely right. I think that's actually, it's something I think I heard Tim Ferriss refer to once upon a time. And he was talking about the fact that you've got to look at your process. And so if I buy a property for 500,000 and I sell it for 1 million, okay, outwardly everybody might say, wow, you're a genius. That was an amazing outcome. And yes, it was a great outcome. But if I bought something for 500,000 and the possible options for an outcome were to actually lose every penny or potentially double my money, then was that a good decision going into that investment? It was actually an incredibly risky binary decision, and you happened to fall on the right side of it. Whereas if that very same investment had been 500,000 and the only possible direction was upwards, that there was some sort of guarantee in place that you would never lose money, well, then that was a good decision. But if there was a binary option and you just happened to get lucky, you've got to recognize that you got lucky. It was nothing to do with your intelligence. It was nothing to do with you being some sort of genius, just sort of stock picker or property picker. And I think that's an important thing for people to remember is don't look at the outcome, look at the risks and your decision process around the risks.
Yeah. I mean, sounds like all I read is poker books, but there's another fantastic book that I read this year by a woman called Anna Konikova, and she is like a psychology academic, and she took a year out of her life to, she had a self-imposed challenge to compete at the Poker World Championships within a year
Wow.
without ever having played poker before. And it was really to teach her all about psychology and decision making and things like that. And she talks about this concept of heads you win, tails you were unlucky, which is how a lot of people, they treat everything like, when things go well, which could just be the headwinds of property, the headwinds of the
Yeah.
economy. Suddenly, I did a great deal, and it could just been the environment that gave you the great deal. But when things go badly, it's always someone else's fault. So this was the concept that she was promoting in her book, is the idea that really you need to analyze things when they go well, not just when they go badly, and take responsibility for things as opposed to just blaming luck when it goes wrong.
Yeah, exactly. And to use my example of 500 to a million decision, like if you bought something for 500,000 and a year later it's worth 450,000, you could easily be beating yourself up and saying, what an idiot, like, but actually if you analyze the decision, you might say, no, I made a good decision. This was based on the facts that I had to hand at the time. It was the only decision I could have come up with. And so just people have to be a little bit removed from the kind of emotional attachment to the outcome. Of course, the outcome is important, but if you're only looking at the outcome, then you could easily start to delude yourself that you're a genius because you had a run of luck, and the luck will come to an end at some point, and you'll be there saying, "But this is exactly the same way I bought the last 3 properties." When the fourth one, when you lose every penny, So
Like you say,
anyway,
that's people just people being swayed by the outcome as opposed to the process. So when things go wrong, if you've got a good process in place and you just keep buying, some of them are going to go wrong. But if you've got the process right, then the goods will outweigh the bad, right?
well, this is it. I guess it's down to your time horizon and how long you have to play. Because some people, they want a result quickly. If you're working with a private investor and that investor wants their money fully repaid within 12 months or something like that, then you might find yourself in a little bit of difficulty. But if you've got a little bit more of a horizon to play with, then you have the time to wait and see whether your decision was ultimately correct.
Yeah.
John, in terms of like putting together a portfolio remotely, tell us a little bit about your process. You must have huge reliance on your team.
Well, a team kind of constantly evolves, but I guess the main process is really to work out your goals before you start. So, I'm such a big believer in this. I'm always talking about it on my podcast. You've got to start with the end in mind. So you reverse engineer everything. And as you were just saying, it depends on your time horizon. So some people are very happy in their job. They're very secure in their job. They like their career, in which case perhaps, that's a very different set of goals and timeline than somebody who's perhaps looking to get out of their career, or perhaps their job is not so secure, so they want to replace their income very quickly, which is going to inform what strategy they use and even what locations they buy in and things like that. So it starts with the goals, and then I would say the next part would be, it's not a linear process, but at the same time you might want to be educating yourself via podcasts, books, forums, communities and things like that, and then start to assemble your team. But none of it is completely linear. So you would want to be into a mortgage broker and a tax advisor and all of these things. And maybe a letting agent, and kind of reverse engineer as much of it as you can. That was my process. I was very careful not to work with people who approached me, but I would educate myself by listening to podcasts, and then I identified the people that I wanted to work with, and I approached them. And that's a great, I would say, for expats and remote investors.
I think that's a good distinction to make. All right, if somebody is chasing you, like you're just some number in a book, and this person is cold calling you, that's not a great introduction. Like maybe you're oh yeah, I do happen to be looking for a property. Yeah, that's great. Like, and next minute you're taking all this information from a person who called you out of the blue. Like you do need to have the vetting process, and usually vetting comes from somebody else that has worked with this person before. That's one of the reasons why you said the community there. I've established this mastermind, and I have about 40 or 50 different people in my mastermind that are all speaking every week. We share information about who you'd buy from, who you'd sell from, and like somebody might throw. We have a WhatsApp group. Somebody might throw a question into the group and say, "Does anyone know a good person for I've got asbestos in this building that I'm looking at. I'd like to know." How do I identify asbestos? How do I treat it and stuff? And next minute, you got 4 or 5 people who've gone through that process saying, use this person, he's brilliant, use that person. And this is a really important thing, is just having your network, I think is super important, because half the time you just don't know what you don't know. You're sitting there, and it's only through listening to other people sharing their experience that you go, really? Is that I didn't actually know that was a risk. I didn't know that was something that can happen. And so you can't know what you don't know until you've actually heard it or actually experienced it yourself.
Yeah. We have a WhatsApp group for expats as well. And we also, we have meetups here in Hong Kong, and there's a group in Dubai, and there's a group in Singapore that also meet up as well. And it's vital to have, because people do say that it's quite a lonely thing. And it's lonely because at the end of the day, although you've got a mortgage broker and you've got a tax advisor and you've got a letting agent and a project manager, at the end of the day, it's you having to make those decisions. So sometimes I think that's what people mean when they say it's lonely.
Yeah. You don't have somebody to bounce an idea off, or to kind of like, it's like having a mentor. It's one of the things that I sort of use as a motivation for joining my mentorship program.
Right.
Is that, like, when I was buying all the properties back into the early 2000s, that all went like, sky high in prices, and I did really, really well. But I was doing it completely uninformed. I didn't have any mentors or anything like that. And whilst I was very lucky, and this is where we talk about the process and stuff, like I had no process. I just happened to get lucky that the right market was rising very, very quickly. And then when I decided to go after the biggest project of my life, 42 million, and raising money from investors and everything like that, and going abroad and buying in the Spanish market, and all of a sudden, that's the moment when I would have really valued a mentor who had lots of experience and could sort of say, hold on a second, Gavin, hold your horses. Like, have you risk analyzed this? You have no experience in this country. Like, why do you think that you're going to figure this out? And there was a whole lot of stuff that just having a mentor there to kind of like ask good questions and say, okay, you like the deal. What about this? Have you considered this? Have you considered that? What happens if the following happens? What's the outcome going to be if that happens, or what's your fallback strategy? You just don't have that if you don't have a mentor, because you're not experienced enough to know what can happen.
Very true, but I'm sure you learnt a hell of a lot by going through all of that. I'm sure you'd rather have not gone through it, but I guess you earn or you learn, right? And I guess in your case, in that you definitely learned.
You see, that's the thing. It's like I had a friend when I was living in Spain who kind of knew me really well at the time I was going through all of this. And he said, Gavin, just look at it as the most expensive MBA that you've ever purchased. And he was like, it's maybe a couple of million, but it's an MBA, and just look at it as an education. Nobody could educate you, the way you're being educated now by the market. And so I use that and I don't look back and beat myself up about it. I kind of say, you know what? This is the cost of trying to save money by not having a mentor or something like that. Like, people are quite short-sighted, I think, in that regard. They don't want to spend money on a mentor, or they don't want to spend money joining a community. And they think they'll figure it out themselves and they'll save those few quid. And the reality is a lot of the time you'll make those mistakes and you'll pay the price for those mistakes.
Yeah. You do have a fantastic story, and I have to give a plug for my own podcast here, but we've just reached episode 200.
Oh,
and
nice. That's a great one.
You are the episode number 200. Your story is unveiled
fantastic.
in all its glory. And yeah, it's a great episode, I have to say. It's a great episode.
Well, I'll definitely put a link down in the show notes when I'm sharing this one out, John. Tell us a little bit about living in Hong Kong. Like, how does it differ from the lifestyle that we'd be familiar with here in Ireland and the UK and stuff?
Gavin, it's been so long since I was in the UK that it's very difficult to know. I mean, we're really looking forward to some aspects of going back to the UK, but I guess here, I'd say it's really efficient. Everything is really efficient. You talked about that skyline. I fell in love with that skyline the first time I saw it in Hong Kong. If anyone's ever been to Hong Kong, you can take the Star Ferry from Kowloon to Hong Kong, or the other way around, and it's just a skyline to die for. So I've always been in love with that skyline. It's my favourite one in the world. Beyond that, really, I like access to the rest of Asia. I have to go quite far now I'm a massive travel geek, so I've been to I think 72 countries now. So I have to go quite far now to be able to go to somewhere I haven't been. I think Mongolia is the closest place that I haven't been to. So it's been great for that. I think I'm going to miss the food. And it really is 24 hours a day.
It's 24 hours. Yeah, it's a little bit like Dubai, I've heard, like that. If you want a coffee delivered to your apartment at 1 o'clock in the morning, yeah, no problem. The guy's at the door two minutes later, kind of thing.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you look forward to going back to the UK. Why, after 20 years and assimilating to another culture, would you actually want to go back to the UK? I'm curious to know.
We've always wanted to go back. So I think one of the main reasons we want to go back is, friends and family. Also, we have a big ambition. My wife's lifelong passion has been to help refugees. So when we go back to the UK, we're trying to replace our income. And when we get back to the UK, then I'm going to kind of look after the portfolio. And my wife is going to, do what she can to help refugees. We spent a week in Lebanon, in Beirut, over just before COVID in 2019, right. Christmas 2019. And we spent a few nights staying at the Shatila refugee camp. I don't know if you know the Shatila refugee camp.
Yes, I heard of it, yeah.
It's been there since 1948, and they have no fresh water there. The water gets pumped in from the sea, so when you wash your hands, it feels like you're washing your hands in sort of oily water, and that's what people shower in. That's their water in that camp. I don't know how many people there are staying in that camp, but it's way too many. It's quite a dangerous place. So that's one of the things that she wants to do, is to maybe try and get fresh water into that camp. And I think that's something that'd be easier to do in the UK than it will from here for some reason. So yeah, it's all those reasons really, to be closer to family, and I quite miss the English weather as well, to be honest.
Really? Because you've got of course, it's quite tropical.
Well, here summer's horrible here. It's just too hot to do anything. And in winter's quite nice, but it is cold. It's not as cold as UK and Ireland, but we don't have central heating here. So everything's built for keeping things cool in summer. So yeah, I think all those different reasons. We just want to go home, really. It's, there's lots of
You've done your
expats that
tour.
don't want to go home, but we do.
Yeah.
My
It's
wife's
funny
actually
how.
from France, so
Okay.
where we'll end up in Europe, not sure.
Yeah. Okay. And tell us, John, in the process of buying, I know that you've looked at auctions and things like that before. You don't recommend purchasing a sort of off-plan type properties,
Not in the
because
UK.
if you're buying off-plan, the likelihood is all the value is kind of, you're paying all the value as opposed to having an opportunity to add value. Whereas auctions, obviously, you can pick up kind of stuff that is older and stuff. Tell us the process that you've discovered in terms of auction purchasing.
So the whole, I was talking a while back earlier in the podcast about how we got a little bit stuck in 2022, and that was when I
Yes.
just started our podcast. So, I had this massive imposter syndrome. I'd started a podcast. We hadn't bought a property in about, well, it was almost 18 months by the time we did buy a property. So here I was talking to all these experts, saying I've got a property podcast. I've got this portfolio of student HMOs, and couldn't buy any property. So I had the idea. So season 1 of our podcast is basically telling the retrospective account of how we acquired those 5 student HMOs, interspersed with interviews with experts. So it'd be a little bit of the story each week, told a bit like a soap story. So then when the story had caught up to the present time, I decided that I would make a self-imposed challenge to buy a UK property at auction within 4 months without leaving Hong Kong, because I thought that would kind of make me have to buy something, right? So then, it was a similar format, but what I did was, instead of having one interview per episode, I just went out and interviewed lots and lots, dozens of people, all to do with auctions, auctioneers, auction specialists, traders, people who run Viewber, which is like a remote viewing service, expats, people who bought at auctions, and anything to the modern method of auction, the head of EIG, which is like the right move, essential information group is the right move of auctions. And interviewed all these people and basically compiled each episode. So there would be multiple guests. It was a huge amount of work, but I'm actually just as passionate about podcasting as property, so I kind of really loved it. But yeah, and then all these people were giving me guidance on how to buy property, and I looked at commercial, I looked at mixed use, I looked at all these different things, title splitting, short lease extensions, all this different kinds of things that you find at auction. And yeah, with 2 weeks to spare, we got our hands on a block of 4 one-bed flats in a market town in Derbyshire. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So you bought a portfolio.
No, it was just like a block of it was a small freehold block of one-bed flats, 4
Okay.
one-bed flats.
I get you.
Yeah.
And what was the process like for that? Like in terms of finding it, doing your due diligence, all of that kind of stuff. How did you go about that from so far away?
Well, I was a member of a club called the Auction Buyers Club, which is it's a pretty good club, really good club, and so I had guidance there, and also being a member of Essential Information Group, it gives you a history of all the properties that have been auctioned before. So this particular property had been in auction, the previous auction run by that auctioneer, and hadn't sold. So yeah, we were able to kind of do our due diligence like that and find out that actually the previous time it had been put in the auction and it still had tenants in it, but this time it was being sold with vacant possession. But that information was only available in the special conditions, which is David Sandyman, who runs the Essential Information Group, that portal that I was telling you about, he has this special mantra that, because most people would say that the special conditions is the most important most important document in the legal pack, but he says the most important document in the legal pack is the one that isn't there. So
Yeah.
But I learned all of these things from all of these experts. But yeah, so the second time this property was in there, the special conditions said that it was being sold with vacant possession, but the marketing didn't. So that would have put a lot of people off, and we made a pre-auction offer and bought it that way. So we just, because the guide price has to be within 10% of the reserve price. So you can tell what the reserve price is by the guide price. So we just offered what was likely to be the reserve price. And rather than them risk going to the room, we were able to buy it like that.
Okay. And it worked out for you so far?
Yeah, it has done. Yes. Yeah. And then a couple of months later, we bought a couple of properties that were sort of halfway between pre and post auction. It was a vendor that had pulled the properties from the auction, and they'd set up like an intermediary, and we bought these properties via them. So 2 3-bed semis on consecutive days we bought them, and the second one we bought like 6 hours between being offered the property and exchanging. So I had a really good solicitor, really fast solicitor. And
that's very fast, 6 hours.
Yeah. And then we had 28 days to complete. And so I was telling some of a couple of friends about this, and I said, we're going to get bridging to make this purchase. And he turned around and said, well, I don't mind financing that. So in the end, we cut out them. We would have paid probably around about, 15% if we'd used bridging. So they were offering, we offered them less than that. And this was a guy who was working as an engineer, and then COVID hit, and he lost his job because he was like a contractor. So he retrained as a teacher. So he had quite significant funds, but he had lost his income. So he invested with us, and we were able to bump up his monthly income, because he went from earning quite a lot of money to like £27,000 as a trainee teacher. And and then when we sort of refinanced the property 6 months later, we were able to pay him back, and then he went back to engineering, but he still invests with us today. So
that's great. And so how many, like you work with sort of third-party investors?
Yes, yeah, we do, but we don't do JVs. I'm quite passionate about not working with JVs. I guess never say never. But, I think a lot of people are very quick to jump into bed with JV partners, and, it's effectively a marriage that's going to last many, many years. And I think people are a bit too quick to do it. And also, you can imagine having a conversation with people. I mean, we're doing I've got a bit of a sore throat at the moment. We're doing 4 HMO projects in Derby at the moment. And, it's been a lot slower than we'd have liked. The returns are not going to be what we'd have liked, and if those were JV deals, then I'd be embarrassed going to them with my tail between the legs, saying, well, the cost of materials has gone up, interest rates haven't come down as quick as I thought. You're going to have to manage your expectations about your returns. But now with our model, anything like that, okay, that's affecting my bottom line, not our investors. Our investors get their guaranteed competitive hands-free return, whatever happens. So I'm much more comfortable with that. So if any mistake, they're guaranteed to get their money. It's a fixed rate, whereas my mistakes affect me, not them.
And tell us about, so that you're basically looking, is it bridging finance, or is that what you're getting from private investors, or how long do they typically invest with you?
Well, our investor list is kind of closed at the moment, but we're always sort of willing to have conversations. But we work on a kind of like a one size fits one, as opposed to one size fits all. So, we have some investors that prefer a monthly income, some that are happy to have their interest rolled up and paid at the end once we have developed. So at the moment we're developing, say, 3-bed terraced houses or semi-detached houses into 6-bed all-ensuite HMOs, using commercial valuations to get the uplift in value to pay back the investors afterwards. So
right.
Yeah, it varies really. So we have different terms, different lengths of terms, all dependent on what the investor. It's investor led. You know, if
Yeah,
we
yeah,
like to get to know our investors over several calls, find out what their needs are, what they want, and then if we can find a way to work together that's a win-win for everybody, then that's the way to do it. It's not like, this is take it or leave it. It's like, how can we help? If we can help,
yeah.
good. If we're a good
And
fit for
and
each other, then we move forward.
and tell us, John, in the case of like investors, if you were looking at the Hong Kong market, like you're only investing in the UK, why is it after doing so well in 2019, I think you mentioned, or 2018, why not invest some funds in the UK, in the Hong Kong market?
Well, this is something that you talk about on my podcast, which will be out this Thursday as we record this, and it's exposure to currency really. So we knew that we were
Okay.
going to be moving back to the UK, and there are some pretty dangerous things to do with tax. So, for example, and a lot of people don't really. This is why I'm saying that really you need to start with the end in mind and really get some good tax advice before you start. Because let's say, for example, we bought some more property in Hong Kong and then we went back to the UK. If we then decide, if we didn't sell that Hong Kong property before moving back to the UK, as soon as we become tax resident in the UK, then we are liable for capital gains tax in the UK for any property held worldwide. So
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah.
once I found that out, I was like, right, okay, let's get our money out of Hong Kong and into the UK, since that's where we were ultimately going to end up.
And do you have to pay capital gains tax as a Hong Kong resident?
Uh, there's no I'm a bit out of date with my knowledge of Hong Kong property, but certainly, as far as I remember, there's no capital gains tax in Hong Kong.
Right. Okay.
But
So
I
it's
mean, I have to
attractive
pay.
market. If
I pay corporation tax in the UK. I pay income tax in the UK on anything that's in the UK. But there's a double taxation agreement between Hong Kong and the UK, so you're not paying tax twice for anything.
Yeah, yeah.
In Hong Kong, I'm
Interesting.
taxed in Hong Kong for my earnings in Hong Kong, and I'm taxed in the UK for my earnings in the UK.
And when do you see your move back to the UK taking place?
18 months.
Oh, there's a timetable.
Very, yeah, yeah. So my
And
daughter will be 80, will be finished and ready to go to university in 18 months' time. And yeah, that's the time we've decided.
are you going back to your London home?
That we do not have quite so much clarity on. Everything has been affected by all these interest rates that have gone up in the UK. We're not making as much money. So all those initial 5 properties that we bought at the beginning of our property story, they're now coming to the end of their 5-year fixes, and the
So they're about
money
to
we're
go up.
making per property has gone right down. So yeah, that's something that we're evaluating, on a regular basis. We'll see.
You've got 18 months to figure it out.
We have, yeah, but that's going to go very fast, right?
It does. It goes away too quickly. As
Yeah,
the as Christmas coming around just recently, and I was just like, I can't believe a year went by that quickly. It's just
yeah.
it's all a blur these days. John, I'm conscious of time. How are people? If well, you're not you're not too much out there in the in the world of who you are and stuff like that. But in terms of your website and your podcast and stuff, tell us how people can find you.
Yeah, so the best place is, sorry, the best place is at the podcast website, which is expatpropertystory.com. And, if you go to the top right-hand corner of that, then you can press the menu and press subscribe. And we have a really good PDF cheat sheet on goals, which is a great
Okay.
place to start. The PDF is kind of split into 3 different parts. One, talking about the questions you need to ask yourself in terms of where you see yourself being, at the end. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to replace your income? Are you looking for long-term wealth? And then the second part is more concerned with where you're at now. So that would be what funds you have available. These are the things you need to think about. What time you have available, what your skill set is. And then the third part, which is often overlooked, is you really want to think about how, if your goals pan out, what that would look like on a daily basis. And, I talk quite a lot about Atomic Habits by James Clear, which is a great book. And he talks about not rising to the level of your goals. We tend to fall to the level of our habits. So that's probably the third part of that PDF is about that. So yeah, if you go to the website, we've also got links to our Instagram and you can see pictures of our property portfolio. There's blogs there, testimonials, and of course the 200 episode back catalogue of Expat Property Story, which has got contributions from the finest minds in UK and Irish property, including Gavin J. Gallagher in episode 200.
Thanks very much for the plug there, John. And John, my final question, I ask this of all my guests, is given your age now and you're kind of looking forward to retiring, and what advice would you give to 20-year-old John starting out on his career?
You know what, Gavin? I'm pretty happy with how things turned out. I wouldn't change anything really. Like I say, I wasn't really motivated by money in the early part of my life. Still not really, to be honest. It's more about I just love property and I love podcasting. I'm scared of money running out, and that's the only way. I don't spend money on myself really. I don't wear expensive jewellery or watch. I've got a 2002 Typhoon battered Honda Civic. I'm not motivated by money. I'm motivated by experiences. I've had some amazing experiences in my life. So yeah,
travel and all that. Yeah,
enjoy it.
Sounds great. Well, look, on that, we will call this podcast to an end. John, it's been a real pleasure. Thanks so much. And if I'm ever in Hong Kong, I'll certainly know to look you up in the next 18 months at least.
And same for me, if I'm ever in Dublin. Thank you so much for inviting me on. It's very kind.
Not at all. Thanks, John.
Hi, guys. I hope you found my conversation with John from Expat Property valuable. John does have a podcast of his own, and I would point you to checking it out. And I'm going to go and put a link in the show notes below. And so, guys, until next week, I look forward to seeing you then. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Behind the Facade. If you enjoyed the show or found it useful in any way, could I please ask you to take a moment to leave a review over on iTunes or Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. There is no algorithm for the podcast, and so the only way we can get other people to find out about it is when it's shared by you. So if you can do that, it'd be great. If you have any questions or topics you'd like me to cover on future episodes, please connect with me via the school community or just send me a message on Instagram or wherever. You'll see the links in the show notes below. You can stay up to date with all of my content and the projects that I'm working on by signing up for my weekly newsletter, and you'll find a link below in the show notes for that too. That's all for now, guys. I'll see you back here same time next week.